All right, strap in everyone because today we are going deep on meditation.
Oh, I love it.
You sent over a really interesting batch of encyclopedia excerpts,
I did.
and it sounds like you're looking for a crash course on this whole thing.
Yeah, the cheat sheet to meditation.
Consider this your express lane to maybe meditation mastery.
Okay, I'm ready.
We're going to hit the historical highlights, unpack the big ideas,
Awesome.
and maybe even dig up some surprising facts along the way.
Okay,
I think this will be good.
sounds good.
Now, one of the things that I think is so interesting is this practice is ancient, but it feels like it's having this huge resurgence,
It really is, and it's really interesting to think about why that is.
particularly in the West.
Uh-huh.
So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to the basics.
Okay,
When we say meditation, what are we even talking about?
that's a great question, and it's really hard to define. Like, how would you define art? There are so many different types, so many interpretations, so there isn't one universal definition.
So maybe instead of trying to find that one perfect definition, we should think of it more like a family of practices,
Yeah.
like a category.
Yes, exactly. So like a family resemblance or prototypes, like there are these shared traits.
Okay.
But there isn't just one thing that makes something meditation, something else not meditation.
Yeah.
But if you look in the dictionary, they talk about meditation as deep thinking or mental focus
Okay.
or exercises that lead to a heightened state of awareness.
Okay.
So that's kind of how people usually think about it. But some researchers,
Well,
Bond et al., they suggested that there were these three core criteria you have to meet to be considered meditation.
all right, lay them on me. What are they?
Okay. So one is that there has to be a defined technique.
Right, so there's some structure to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second one is this idea of logical relaxation.
Logical relaxation. Now you're just using big words to confuse me. Break that down for me. What is logical relaxation?
So logical relaxation is a state of deep calm, but achieved through a structured technique, not just zoning out.
Okay.
It has to be intentional. So you're not just relaxing by watching TV, you're actively relaxing.
So it's not just emptying your mind, it's actively engaging with it in this specific way.
Exactly. And then the third criteria is that it has to be a self-induced mode of being.
So I can't be hypnotized into meditating,
Yeah.
basically. It has to be something I'm doing myself.
Yeah, you're choosing to do it.
I'm taking agency in it. Okay, interesting. So I love that we've got these three criteria: defined technique, logical relaxation, and self-induced.
Right.
Before we start digging into those techniques, I want to go way back.
Okay.
Historically, where does this whole thing even come from?
So our sources trace it back to ancient India,
Okay.
specifically the Upanishads,
Upanishads, okay.
which are these central texts in Hinduism.
So we're talking like ancient wisdom here.
Yeah, yeah. And in these texts, meditation, known as dhyana, was already a well-established practice.
So it wasn't a new thing,
No.
even back then.
Yeah.
It had been around. Okay, so it was big in Hinduism. Was it just a Hindu thing, or did it spread to other traditions or other religions?
It was also found in other Indian religions, so Buddhism and Jainism.
Oh, okay.
And they all had their own practices, but the core idea was achieving pure awareness
Okay.
and liberation from this like mental chatter,
Yeah.
the idea that your mind is constantly talking to you.
A monkey mind.
Yeah, exactly. So, in these traditions, it's about reaching moksha or vimukti or kaivalya. So those are just different names for that state of liberation.
Freedom. Yeah. Okay. So we've got this theme of inner peace that runs throughout these different traditions. But it's fascinating to me that it wasn't just like, hey, sit here and be peaceful. They developed all of these structured systems to help people get to this state of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, in Hinduism, there's something called Patanjali's Yoga Sutras,
Okay.
and it outlines 8 limbs or steps towards this inner awareness or kaivalya that we were talking about.
8 limbs. So we're talking like a whole life philosophy here, not just like a quick meditation fix.
Exactly. It's about the way you live your life.
Okay.
So the first 4 are kind of like the outer limbs.
Okay.
So you have ethical living, conduct, physical postures, and breath control. So it's about laying this foundation.
Gotcha. So like getting the basics in place before you really go deep.
Exactly. And then you have these inner limbs, withdrawal from the senses, focused concentration, deep meditation, and then finally this state of absorption called samadhi.
So when we're picturing meditation, I think a lot of people picture, these ancient yogis sitting in lotus pose for hours and hours and hours.
Right.
Is that like the standard meditation image, or is it a little more diverse than that?
It's a lot more diverse than that. So you do have the lotus and cross-legged, of course, but there's also kneeling,
Okay.
walking meditation, like kinhin.
Oh, interesting. So you don't have to just be sitting.
No. And then there's even mindful tasks called samu.
Okay.
And then, lying down meditation is a thing too, shavasana.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Shavasana corpse pose. So there's a meditation posture for everyone and every energy level. This is great.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's be practical. Yeah, how much time do we realistically need to carve out to actually do this?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where a lot of people get intimidated. Like, oh, I don't have hours and hours to just sit in silence.
Well, the good news is a little goes a long way.
Okay.
So some techniques like transcendental meditation will say 20 minutes twice a day is good.
Okay.
But, some people say even 8 minutes a day can be beneficial.
Okay.
Don't forget your tools.
What do you mean by cools?
So prayer beads are really common across different religions.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And they often have 108 beads, which is a number that has a lot of spiritual significance.
Okay. So whether it's 8 minutes or 20 minutes,
Yeah.
there are also these aids that can kind of help us along. Now, we're talking about prayer beads, but I've also heard about these things called encouragement sticks in Zen Buddhism, which sound a little less, shall we say, tranquil?
Yes. So not quite the peaceful image that usually comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
But it's not about punishment. It's just a gentle tap to kind of bring you back to the present moment.
Like a little physical snap out of it
Yeah.
for your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So it just makes you realize that even these like seasoned practitioners need a little help sometimes to stay focused.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got the postures, we've got the time frames, we've got the tools.
Yeah.
But what about the techniques themselves? Like how do we actually do meditation?
Right. So that's where we get into the two main categories that are used in the West.
Okay.
So focused meditation and then open monitoring meditation.
All right, break it down for me. Tell me about focused meditation. What is that all about?
Okay. So focused meditation, you're concentrating on a specific object.
Okay.
So it could be your breath, a mantra, some kind of visualization, or even a feeling like loving kindness.
So it's like training a laser beam of attention onto one specific thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And what about open monitoring? Is that kind of the opposite, where you just let your thoughts run wild?
Not exactly. It's more about cultivating awareness of whatever arises in your mind, thoughts, feelings, sensations without judgment.
Okay.
So, you're kind of observing them, but you're not getting swept away by them.
Like watching clouds drift by, you're not trying to grab them.
Yeah, exactly. Like observing the weather patterns of your mind.
Oh, I like that.
And mindfulness is a really good example of this type of meditation.
So focused meditation is like training that attention muscle. And open monitoring is kind of like this wide-angle lens of your whole mental landscape.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So these are two really broad categories. I'm assuming there are other ways to classify these different types of meditation?
Right. There are other ways to classify techniques,
Okay.
and some of them even blend both approaches.
Okay.
So, for example, in the Buddhist traditions, you have samatha and vipassana.
Samatha and vipassana.
Okay. And samatha means calm, abiding.
Okay.
And it cultivates a still mind, usually through focused attention.
Okay.
And then vipassana means insight. And it builds on that stability to develop deeper understanding, usually through open monitoring.
So it's like samatha lays the groundwork, and then vipassana helps you build like a house of wisdom on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. They work together.
I love that.
Okay.
So we've done this deep dive into ancient India. We've looked at these different techniques. How did all of this make its way to the West? Like, when did meditation start catching on outside of these traditional settings?
Yeah, it's a journey that goes back centuries. But there are some key moments we can point to. So, in the late 19th century, Eastern spiritual teachings were being introduced to Western audiences.
Okay.
And this was happening through events like the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago.
Okay.
And at this event, figures like Swami Vivekananda, they introduced the West to Vedanta philosophy and meditation practices.
That must have been mind-blowing for people who had never encountered these ideas before.
Absolutely.
But I'm guessing it wasn't like an overnight sensation. It took a while for these things to really take root, right?
Yeah, it did take a while.
Right.
The real surge in popularity happened in the 1960s.
Okay.
And it was this time of, the countercultural movement.
Right.
There were all these Asian spiritual teachers coming to the West.
Uh-huh.
Like, the Dalai Lama, for example, was really key
Yeah.
in bringing Tibetan Buddhist practices to the West.
And meditation was a part of that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that makes sense that in a time when people were questioning the status quo and exploring all of these new ways of being, that meditation would find a, a foothold there.
Right.
Okay. But meditation in the modern West doesn't look like just sitting in robes chanting Om anymore, does it? How has it evolved?
No, it's definitely evolved. So you see this rise of secular meditation,
Okay.
and this really emphasizes those practical benefits.
Okay.
So like mental and physical well-being rather than just the spiritual goals.
Oh, interesting.
So now you see meditation in workplaces, schools, and even psychotherapy.
Okay. So it's gone from the monastery to the boardroom.
Right.
All right. Let's get to the heart of it. Does it actually work?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, what does the science say about the effects of all of this stuff?
Well, there's this whole field of research that's come about that studies the effects of meditation on the body and the mind.
Okay.
And the evidence is growing that it can have a real impact.
So it's not just like people's subjective experiences, but they're actually seeing changes.
Right. So, for instance, there are studies that have shown that meditation can lower your heart rate
Oh, wow.
and your blood pressure, reduce your stress hormones, and it can even decrease pain perception.
Okay, so all those chill vibes aren't just in our heads.
Right.
The science is backing it up.
Huh.
But I've also heard a little bit about some potential downsides of meditation, too.
Right.
Is there anything that we should be aware of before we, jump into this practice with both feet?
Yes, definitely. It's really important to remember that. Like any powerful tool, you have to approach it with awareness
Okay.
and ideally some guidance.
But don't just go off and do a 10-day silent retreat without knowing what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, exactly. And this is especially important for people who have pre-existing mental health conditions.
Oh, okay.
So, there have been reports of adverse effects. So things like anxiety, depression, and in rare cases, something called meditation-related psychosis.
Hold on. Psychosis. Now that's a little scary.
Right.
Should we be concerned?
I mean, don't panic.
Okay.
These cases are really rare.
Okay.
And usually they're linked to specific factors, like really intense retreats, prolonged retreats, especially without proper guidance.
Okay, so it's kind of like saying exercise is harmful because some athletes overdo it and get injured.
Exactly. You have to be responsible.
Ah.
You have to start slowly.
Okay,
Listen to your body.
makes sense.
And if anything comes up, if you're struggling, seek professional guidance.
Right, sound advice. Always better to err on the side of caution. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The history, techniques, potential benefits, and risks. Now I'm curious, how is meditation being used today in fields like psychotherapy or education or even the workplace? And what could this all mean for the future? That's where I think things get really interesting.
That is a great question, and it really does deserve a deeper dive. So stay tuned, because up next, we're going to explore all the ways that meditation is being used in the modern world and what this might mean for all of us as we go forward.
Right, can't wait.
It's fascinating to think about how some of the big names in psychology, like Carl Jung and Erich Fromm, were already exploring Eastern practices like meditation back in the mid-20th century.
So the connection between psychology and meditation isn't new.
Not at all.
But I imagine there was some hesitancy to embrace these, seemingly foreign practices in Western therapy.
Oh, absolutely. Both Jung and Fromm, while intrigued by the potential, really emphasize understanding the cultural context and approaching these practices cautiously. They warned against just transplanting Eastern practices into Western psychology without considering the differences in worldview.
So like they were saying, let's build bridges between these traditions, not force a square peg into a round hole. But it seems like those bridges have been built in recent decades. So how is meditation being used in clinical psychology today?
One of the biggest developments has been the rise of mindfulness-based therapies.
Okay.
They draw inspiration from Buddhist practices, but are adapted for a secular context.
Okay.
And these therapies are showing a lot of promise in treating a variety of conditions, including anxiety, depression, and even addiction.
Mindfulness seems to be everywhere these days. But how does it actually work as therapy?
Think of it as mental training. Mindfulness-based therapies teach people to pay attention to their thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the present moment without judgment. And this helps them become more aware of their patterns of thinking and reacting,
Okay.
which can be really helpful in breaking free from negative cycles.
So instead of getting swept away by those thoughts and emotions, you learn to kind of observe them with a scientist's eye.
Exactly. It's about developing a sense of space around your experiences rather than feeling trapped by them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
But let's move beyond the therapist's office. You mentioned schools and workplaces earlier.
Mhm.
How is meditation finding its way into those settings?
The modern workplace, with all of its demands and pressure, is basically a breeding ground for stress.
Mhm.
And employers are starting to realize that meditation and mindfulness can be a huge help for their employees.
Yeah, it seems like every company is offering yoga classes or mindfulness workshops these days. But is it more than just a trendy perk? Is there evidence that it's actually making a difference?
Yeah, there's actually a growing body of research suggesting that these programs can have a really positive impact on employee well-being.
Okay.
Studies have shown they can lead to reduced stress, increased focus, and even improved relationships among coworkers.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
Exactly.
What about schools? I can only imagine how beneficial meditation could be for kids, especially with all the pressure they face in today's academic environment.
Absolutely. There is a lot of interest in bringing mindfulness into education.
Okay.
It has the potential to help students develop emotional regulation skills and cope with stress and anxiety.
Hmm.
And some studies even suggest it can improve attention and focus in the classroom.
Wow, so it's not just about sitting still and breathing.
Mm.
Mindfulness can actually help kids thrive, both academically and emotionally.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But with all this talk about the benefits, how does this tie back to those potential downsides we talked about earlier? Is there a risk of oversimplifying or misinterpreting these practices as they become more mainstream?
That's a really important point. We need to be mindful of mindfulness, right? It's not a quick fix or a cure-all.
Right.
There's a risk of reducing it to just another trendy technique and ignoring the nuances and complexities of these practices and the importance of proper guidance and training.
It's a good reminder that a healthy dose of critical thinking is always important, especially in the world of wellness trends. But I can't help but feel optimistic about the potential of meditation. It's a practice that has stood the test of time, and it feels like we're only beginning to tap into its power to transform our lives.
I agree. It's fascinating how meditation, with its roots in ancient traditions, continues to evolve and adapt to our changing needs. It really speaks to its enduring relevance and its potential to help us navigate the complexities of modern life.
Okay, so we've explored the history, the techniques, the potential benefits and risks, and we've even touched on its modern applications. But given everything we've learned, what does this mean for us as individuals navigating this, crazy world? Could meditation be more than just a personal practice? Could it actually be a crucial skill for thriving in the future?
That's a big question. We live in an age of information overload, constant distractions, and increasing demands. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and disconnected.
Totally. It's like our minds are constantly racing, and it's hard to find a moment of peace.
Exactly. And in this context, meditation offers a powerful antidote. It's a way to cultivate inner stillness, resilience, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
So it's not about escaping reality, but about equipping ourselves to engage with it in a more skillful and compassionate way.
Precisely. It's about finding that inner strength and clarity to navigate the chaos.
But meditation is often seen as this solitary practice. Could it also play a role in fostering connection and building a more compassionate and just world?
Now, that's a fascinating question and one that deserves further exploration. So stay tuned as we wrap up this deep dive by considering the potential of meditation to not only transform individual lives, but also to contribute to a more mindful and compassionate society.
So we've been deep diving into meditation as a tool for like personal well-being.
Right.
But now I'm curious about its potential on a much larger scale.
Okay.
Like, could it actually help to create a more compassionate and just world?
It's a fascinating question, and I think it could. Many of the challenges we face as a society, things like conflict, division, this lack of empathy, it often stems from this fundamental disconnect, right? Both within ourselves and with each other.
Like we're so caught up in our own heads, our own stories, that we forget that we're part of something much bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how can meditation bridge that gap?
Yeah.
Because it's often seen as this very individual practice.
Right. But think about the core principles of meditation. Cultivating awareness, non-judgment, compassion. When you practice these things consistently, these qualities, they can ripple outward. They influence not just our inner world, but also how we interact with others.
So it's not just about finding inner peace, but kind of letting that inner peace radiate outward,
Exactly.
creating a more peaceful world from the inside out.
Exactly. The more we cultivate these qualities within ourselves, the more likely we are to bring them into our relationships, into our communities, and even into our political discourse. Imagine a world where leaders practiced mindfulness, where dialogue was driven by empathy rather than this reactivity, where conflict was approached with this genuine desire to understand.
I mean, that sounds amazing,
Mm.
but is it really possible? Like, how do we get there? Can we really scale up these individual practices to create like a more mindful society?
It's a challenge for sure, but I don't think it's impossible. And we are seeing signs of this shift. Mindfulness programs are being implemented in schools, in businesses, and even government institutions.
Okay.
And there's this growing recognition that these practices can have a profound impact on well-being, both individually and collectively.
It's like we're planting these seeds of mindfulness everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's going to take more than just a few scattered programs, right?
Yeah.
What else can we do to nurture this transformation?
Education.
Okay.
Education is key.
Yeah.
So we need to start teaching these skills early on,
Okay.
helping children to develop emotional intelligence and compassion from a young age. And we need to continue fostering these qualities throughout our lives, creating this culture that values mindfulness and supports its integration into all aspects of society.
So it's a long game.
Yes.
Like it's a multi-generational project,
Yeah,
but it starts with each of us.
it does.
By committing to our own practice, by embodying these principles in our daily lives,
Mhm.
we're contributing to that collective shift.
Right. It's like the old saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
Each act of mindfulness, each moment of compassion is a step toward a more just and harmonious world. Who knows? Maybe one day meditation will be as commonplace as brushing our teeth, right?
Yeah.
This simple yet essential practice for maintaining not just our personal well-being, but the well-being of our planet and all its inhabitants.
That's a beautiful vision. And I think that's a perfect place to maybe wrap up our deep dive into the world of meditation. We've
Yeah.
covered so much ground from ancient history to modern science, from personal transformation to societal change.
We have.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this isn't just about checking off a box, right?
Right.
The real journey is ongoing.
Absolutely. And as you continue exploring this world, remember that meditation is not just a practice, it's a way of being. It's about cultivating awareness, compassion, this deep connection to yourself and the world around you.
And who knows? Maybe along the way you'll discover that inner peace you've been searching for, and maybe, just maybe, you'll even inspire others to do the same. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of meditation. Until next time, keep those minds meditating.